This is the Observations Podcast for Friday, the 10th of March, 2023, if I have my years correct. Welcome back to the podcast. It's good to be back. It's also good to be back with our technical problems essentially solved. And so we are both here and both ready to go. I am, of course, as always, Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade.
I got something I want to talk about, and I'm not sure how I want to talk about it. But as you know, the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, released a whole bunch of January 6th video from all of the surveillance footage at the Capitol to, of all people, Tucker Carlson, which I think is kind of weird that he didn't just release it to all of the press as a whole. But okay, so now Tucker Carlson has his hand on it. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to escape the sense that Tucker Carlson is manipulating what he's releasing for political, ideological, partisan purposes.
Well, have you watched any of it?
Yeah, I have. And it strikes me, and it certainly struck my wife as well, who was watching it, as saying, oh, look, see, this was mostly a peaceful demonstration. Mostly peaceful, which one could say about, say, the BLM demonstrations of 2020. They were
many did say.
Yeah, fiery and mostly peaceful. Here is, I think, my problem. I am really tired of being manipulated. I am tired of the manipulation that went on at the January 6th committee, where they had their own story to tell, and they told it. And I suspect that Tucker Carlson has a different story he wants to tell. And I'm thinking that the truth is probably somewhere very much in the middle. I do not believe that this was an insurrection that left our republic hanging by a thread for several hours on January 6th. That's just gobsmackingly stupid. I also don't believe that it was a bunch of fluffy kitties and happy puppies who were largely gamboling through the Capitol. You know, reality is complex and it's messy. And events like this, which turn riotous, and I think based on much of the video I've seen, it turned riotous. At the same time, there were probably a lot of people who were not interested in a riot. There were probably people who were kind of in the middle or the back of the crowd who, when they finally got up there and saw doors were open, they just assumed that they could go, pouncing right in and take pictures or whatever. I'm sure there was a mixture of good and bad things happening that day. What I would like is a balanced account and somebody who doesn't have a partisan or political axe to grind to go over it, so that I don't have to go over, even assuming I were given the opportunity, 10,000 hours of video myself, because I have a life.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally get that. I think part of the problem is that there was such a huge narrative that went on for 2 years, almost 3 years, that needs to be countered before you can even begin to get to the, what really happened, overall. There was certainly violence. We know that. We've seen lots of footage of it. There were certainly rioters among the MAGA crowd. We've seen that footage as well. But I think it was something like 2,000 people or so that participated in this, riots, wandering through the Capitol, however you want to frame it. There have been hundreds who have been held without bail, without trial. And then when they get to trial, they're not allowed, they weren't given, the exculpatory evidence. They were forced into these plea deals. they have been essentially ruined, and some of them never even entered the Capitol.
Yeah.
I mean, they're essentially political prisoners.
And by the way, I'm happy with the term riot because that's what I think it was. I'm
I think it was
unhappy.
too.
I'm unhappy with the term insurrection because I absolutely do not think that that's what it was.
Well, if it was a pretty it was pretty doomed to fail if you're not even armed and have no actual leaders or direction or anything else. Not to mention, what are you going to do? So you take over the Capitol. That doesn't like change anything. I mean, Congress can meet anywhere. They can meet at the Hilton Garden Inn if they want. It's still Congress. But anyway, that aside, I'm thinking of the QAnon shaman guy.
Yeah, Jacob Charmsley or Chalmsley, whatever his last name is.
Something like that, yeah. And how the video that Tucker aired was interesting in that it was completely exculpatory for what he was charged with. And matter of fact, even the bad stuff where he's shouting and walking amongst congressional halls unattended, you never see him be violent, and that's what he was charged with. You see him being led into the Senate chamber by the police themselves. It seems to me he was massively overcharged. His attorney at the time has come out and said, no, we were not given this evidence, even though we asked for it lots of times. It would have made a huge decision in the sentencing and in the charging. So, I mean, that's a serious travesty. And if they did it to him, who else did they do it to?
Well, that brings up the problem that I have with a lot of this is that this video has largely been unreleased for a long time. Wasn't even released to many of the defendants, despite the fact that there were discovery requests that were made, and I don't know whether they were simply lied to and told, "Oh, sorry, we don't have anything for you. We've looked over it all." But again, they didn't release all of that video to the defense attorneys either. That was released to Tucker. So I mean, there does seem to be, at the very least, eliding past the discovery requirements, which in a free country for a criminal trial are pretty freaking important. You have an absolute duty, which, by the way, when you look at the people who have been convicted, I think we're probably at 68 of the 600-ish or so who have actually been convicted of a felony charge. The vast majority of the rest, all misdemeanors, all things like,
trespassing.
Yeah, trespassing, unlawful parading, being found in a restricted area. These are all, well, I say misdemeanors, but like in the shaman's case, he got 41 months.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, 3.5 years. That's a while for a misdemeanor.
Yeah.
And yet most of these people are being convicted of misdemeanors. Now, there are a couple of people who were convicted because they whacked a cop on the head with a flagpole or a sign or something like that. Well, I got bad news for you. If you hit a cop and you get caught,
that's what happens.
You're probably going to get charged with a felony. It generally works that way.
Right.
But it's not good if the government. I mean, we have this thing. I mean, these people tried to overthrow the government of the United States. They tried to mount a coup that once they prevented Congress from meeting, blah, 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 and Donald Trump would then be president for life.
None of that was true.
Okay. Why isn't anybody being charged with it? But that narrative is there. And so how much is that narrative interfering with the police's duty to provide, and not just the police, but obviously the U.S. attorney who is in charge of these cases, or U.S. attorneys who are in charge of these cases? What about their duty to provide all exculpatory material as well as just, whatever they present?
This is a solid, I mean, Brady is still very good law. and strongly enforced.
Well, you say that, but
Well, when it's known that that evidence was withheld. I mean, how would you? I mean, you can't prove something that you haven't ever seen or have no idea even exists. Um, so this is going to come back to bite the prosecutors a little bit. I mean, let's face it, they're going to get a slap on the wrist and get a solid chewing out from like Royce Lambert and some of the other judges, but
yeah,
they're not going
and
to
look,
get this
by the way,
far.
these people all took plea deals for the most part. I mean, very few of them went to trial. They pled guilty. Their case is over.
Right.
They're not going to be able to walk back into federal court and say, hey, takesies, backsies.
Well, that's not true. They can't appeal. There's nothing to appeal. And they actually, I think it's fairly common, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's fairly common when you sign a plea deal in a criminal case, you also say, I'm not gonna appeal anything. But in the case where new evidence comes to light that tends to either mitigate or prove innocence, then you can absolutely reintroduce that, and ask for a new trial, as well as for sanctions against the attorneys for not meeting their Brady obligations. So there's definitely a lot of play here, and like you said, a lot of these people took plea deals. I mean, they were basically forced to. They didn't have much of a choice because all they were shown was evidence that, was interpreted by the prosecution to show that they were guilty. And that's all the jury was going to see. The defense wasn't allowed to put on almost any defense. So, I mean, when you're facing that sort of thing, of course you plea deal.
Yeah,
You try to get the least amount of time as possible.
yeah. I mean, look, if you know you're looking at a felony stretch of 5 to 10,
Yeah.
and the prosecutor comes up and says, for you, senor,
Yeah. I'll do you
a good
18
price.
months.
Yeah, I'll do you 18 months on a misdemeanor. And then you don't have a felony conviction. It's a misdemeanor. And what the hell? A couple of years from now, you can ask to have it expunged.
Right. So, I mean, of course, a lot of people are going to take that deal. And that's a problem throughout the criminal justice system. But in this case, it's especially egregious because other than those few, dunderheads who were actually violent, broke stuff, hit cops, hurt people. I mean, the vast majority of them really didn't do anything. They were little old ladies staying within the cordon ropes and like they're on a tour. I mean, maybe they shouldn't have been there. And I say maybe advisedly because the doors are open for you by the cops, the ones supposedly providing security, and you wander through and then leave. It's hard to
Yeah,
call
see,
that trespass.
I know, but that's where it gets super complex because
It does.
you are a police officer, and having been through riot control training myself as a police officer, one thing that you don't want to do is piss off 10,000 people when there's 100 of you. All
I
right?
get it. You got to pick your battles.
You're highly trained, but quantity is a quality of all of its own. And
Absolutely.
so what you do, you try to de-escalate. You try to,
Of course.
and so, you have to ask yourself the question, okay, so do I pull out my piece and cap about 10 or 12 of these suckers?
Right.
And then when reload time comes up, take my chances? Or, do I pull back? Because I'm looking around and I ain't got no horses and I don't have the National Guard or anything like that. And by the way, we could probably discuss for a long time the security failures of that
Yes.
day. But
And that was never brought up in the J6 committee.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it was the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who had, was in charge of security for Congress. She did nothing. Matter of fact, she apparently told people to back down. Trump had offered National Guardsmen, for that day, just to make sure, because he had been informed that there were some credible threats. Okay, let's Mobilize the National Guard. Nope, we don't want them.
No, and so if you're just one of the cops that are there facing, 4,000 or 5,000 people and you and your 6 buddies, look, they're getting in the Capitol anyway. So
Sure.
you might as well back off and open the doors because you're not going to stop them.
And what was so bad about that?
And by the way, nobody's coming to ride to your rescue if you do something that escalates the situation and it turns south.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Matter of fact, it was almost like they prevented anyone from coming to the rescue.
Now, look, I think the chief of the Capitol Police seems like he's a bit of an asshole. And in fact, some of these cops that testified in front of the J6 committees, they all strike me as a bit of an asshole as well.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you.
But that aside, when you're just surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of people and you know that there's
preservation
no
makes a big deal. Yeah.
Maybe
we can all be wired up and say, I'm not going to get all of you. We're going to get a couple of you guys up front there. I understand.
It's like Kurt Russell in Tombstone. Yeah. They may get me, but it won't stop me from turning your head into a canoe.
Yeah.
Jerk that smoke wagon and get to work.
That was Billy Bob Thornton.
Yeah, it was.
Super fat Billy Bob Thornton. Anyway, yeah. So getting back to the original point that you raised, I absolutely agree with you. It would be really nice if we had some real reporters who would dig into this stuff, show the good, the bad, and the ugly, and let people decide. But, let's not go with narratives. I hate the narratives.
Well, one thing I will have to say, ProPublica does have a, now, again, I don't know how it was curated or how it got there. And I, again, don't have time to watch all of it, but ProPublica actually has a time-stamped sort of minute-by-minute collection of videos that they pulled off social media and stuff like that. So people that were taking it at the time.
Right.
And they just have a whole webpage that is just nothing but what seems to me to be hundreds of videos that were taken at the time. So
from private, from the people who were there.
Yeah, they just pulled that off of social media, basically, from people who were there. But that's not the surveillance video, and that's what I want to see. And look, what I would expect to see in that surveillance video is a mixture of assholes trying to duke it out with the cops and trying to break in, like that one video down in the Capitol garage where they were trying to shut the garage doors. And there were all kinds of people outside who were throwing stuff under that door and trying to prop it open, and ultimately they did. And the garage doors, for safety reasons, started opening up, and the cops are all in there. All right, you're done. You're not stopping these folks. You might as well step out of the way, raise your hands and say, come on into the garage, folks, because they're coming in anyway. But clearly that is an unauthorized entry into Congress. I mean, Absolutely. When the cops are closing a garage door and you're throwing furniture under it and you're doing everything you can to keep that door from closing. And then when you manage to do that, you all start piling in. Okay. You're part of a riot.
Yes. Absolutely.
So I expect to see that. I also expect to see Meemaw from Florida in her Trump hat walking through, with her little, Kodak camera and taking pictures inside the Capitol and being completely oblivious to the fact of what else may be going on in there. I expect it to be a wild mixture of all of that because you know what? Riots and protests, even riots that turn violent, that generally are. I mean, it's very rare that you have a riot where 10,000 people are just filled with righteous indignation. Usually it's 100, 200 people who sort of set it off, and everybody else, I mean, look, you're 10, 15 rows back in this crowd. You don't know what's going on.
Right.
And most of the time,
by the time whole mob mentality, and then people get caught up in the, I mean, there's actual real psychological studies on this.
Oh, yeah.
People get caught up in doing things they wouldn't normally do just because the mob's doing it.
And everybody else is going into the Capitol, so why don't you go into the Capitol? And then, 6 weeks later, the FBI asks you to turn yourself in at the local FBI field office because, well, you're an insurrectionist.
Right. And a lot of them did.
Yeah.
amazingly enough.
And then the whole thing about just keeping these people in jail.
Yes, that's disturbing to me. The fact that they've been held without bail, um, pretrial detention, and they've been kept for over a year. And when most of these people, so a misdemeanor is defined as um, an offense that could put you in jail for a year or less. I mean, that's what a misdemeanor is. And since most of these people were in jail for misdemeanors, misdemeanor trespass, misdemeanor parading, or whatever it's called, and they should have been released a long time ago.
Yeah, at this point, the result of the trial is moot in terms of their life. They've already served the sentence pre-trial.
Right.
Which, by the way, is not how this is supposed to work. How do you get? But of course, then we get back to prosecutors overcharging, which is what they always do. Because, but if you were charged with, misdemeanor parading, and I mean actually charged, if that was what they had arrested and had you in jail for, there just seems to be a measure of, and I don't know what else to call it other than malevolence for a judge who looks at you at your arraignment and says, "Oh, they're putting in you here for a misdemeanor. You didn't actually hurt anybody. There's no allegation that you did anything. I think we have to deny you bail. Boom, and then you're off to jail.
Right.
That just seems hugely unfair, and yet it happened. And sure,
and especially when you compare it to how the rioters from Trump's inauguration were all just let go. The rioters who set the president's church on fire, St. John's, who tried to tear down the statue of I can't remember if it was Lafayette and Lafayette Square, if it was Andrew Jackson or both, who tried to attack the White House. None of these people have been charged with anything. They
and won't
injured
be.
all kinds of government officials. And they just get let go constantly. And it's the unfairness alone is one thing.
And by the way, it's hard to escape the idea that the reason why they're being held there and the reason they're held there without bail is because if you just let them all go and let them all just go back to their homes and go back to their lives, wait for their trial dates, it becomes a lot harder for them to become insurrectionists who came within an ace of overthrowing the republic, doesn't it?
Right. And that's what it is. It's hugely political. And it's a complete bastardization of what the government is supposed to do and what it's allowed to do, frankly. So many rights have been violated. It's a little scary.
Yeah, but they're all MAGA rubes and hayseeds. So what does it matter?
Right. Unfortunately, that's how the media treats it, and that's how they seem to think of it. It's a whole different ball game when it's their own ox getting gored, but they don't care about that. And it's just that's just so fundamentally against everything that this country is about. The whole point to this experiment was that we were all treated equally under the law. And it's just become so obvious that there are two tiers to the justice system. And people are getting fed up about it. Rightly so. I mean, I'm fed up about it. By the way, I don't know, kind of specific to this J6 stuff, if you saw the Naomi Wolf apology letter.
Yes, I read that today.
That was very, very interesting. I mean, I'm not going to say she's been red-pilled, but maybe half red-pilled. It was a pretty deep look. Now, she blamed it all on the media, but she did take responsibility for it. Well, it was just something I thought I just, of course that's what happened, because these people are bad. But it was a pretty damn good exegesis of how being force-fed all these lies by the dominant media presence really sets the tone for how the general electorate views other people, their fellow Americans, and how they approach these sort of issues with just hate in their hearts. You know, it's part of the reason why a Republican cannot get a fair trial in D.C. Certainly not in New York City. I doubt in San Francisco or L.A. either. That's a problem. That's a serious problem.
Well, I have my problems with Naomi Wolf. Her
I have a
apologies.
lot of problems with Naomi Wolf.
Her apologies mean little to me, other than the fact that 4 years later, you've now decided to be honest. But literally, and look, we've been doing this, Michael, for what, almost 20 years now.
God damn, it has been that long.
Yeah, it has been that long. I am not a PhD in the public eye, a media person living in New York with, who, by the way, has access to national media almost at will. I mean, she's on TV fairly regularly. Yet funny that all of the things that she apologized for, I knew were bullshit 4 years ago.
Yep.
She's just finding out now.
Right.
And it does, by the way, though, speak to a deeper problem. I think that if you are 4 years into this and you're still parroting the mainstream media's lines on this stuff, well, you're probably just a fool and I don't need to listen to anything else that you say. However, for the average person, we're clearly, here's the problem. If I have a news media that lies to me, which, by the way, I think is undeniable, and I think that's true, as you and I have discussed before, whether you're talking about Fox News or whether you're talking about MSNBC, they're telling you different lies. But we have this idea, and it was relatively true, but back in the old days, like the Walter Cronkite days. Say whatever you want about Walter Cronkite and sneaking his political positions in, but he certainly wasn't as blatant about it as they are today. But at the time, news at all the networks, which is where everybody pretty much got their news anyway, news at all the networks was seen as a money-losing public service.
A loss leader, right?
Yeah, it's going to keep the FCC off our back if we have a news division. Yeah, we're going to lose money off the news division, but we've got so much TNA on Friday and Saturday night that we can make it up on that rather than, Meemaw and Pawpaw watching Walter Cronkite at 5:30 p.m. And I think there was a different ethos with the news then. When Ted Turner came along and came up with CNN, and we had this explosion of cable news, which at the same time, changes in leadership at the major networks, CBS first and then ABC and NBC, the idea became, hey, why are we treating the news division as a money-losing proposition? They should be making money just the way every other division of the corporation makes money. And we got away from this public service idea. And of course, the cable companies operated explicitly on a for-profit basis. And then the question becomes, if I got to make money, am I going to make more money by having boring old Walter Cronkite go on, that's the way it is? Or am I going to make a lot more money by throwing red meat to a selected demographic? And Fox figured out, and everyone else quickly figured out as well, we're going to throw red meat to a particular demographic.
Well, CNN figured that out.
Well, yeah,
because they had the rather
in the 80s
fortunate experience of Desert Storm happening when they were only a few years into it, and when they were able to put on 24-hour news about the latest happenings in Iraq and Kuwait, that propelled them forward. And then you started seeing all the competitors come out like, wait a minute, there's something to this.
So you get CNBC and MSNBC
Right.
and Fox News and all these cable news companies. And they make their living by selling a narrative to whatever audience they've selected to sell a narrative
Sure.
to.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and think about it, like CNBC was and still is. I mean, anybody who works with markets, stock traders, insurance brokers, anybody that's dependent on what's going on in the business world and in the economy, they have that on all day long. And it is informative. I mean, it's misinformative too, just like anything else, but it does at least give you live updates of what's going on. It gives you a lot of interesting people who will expound upon what they think these trends mean and whatsoever, so on.
Yeah, but
It's really important.
I would say that you could probably watch Fox Business and get something very similar. I mean, at the end of the
I
day,
agree. No, that's
yeah,
I'm saying the same
they're
thing.
kind of exceptions because
You
they
could
are
even put it
so.
on the radio in, say, San Diego.
Yeah, well, but you see, here's the thing: they're so narrowly focused on the markets that politics tends not to intrude as much onto either
As much.
CNBC
True. Yeah.
or Fox Business as it would on the main cable channels. I mean, when you look at, and by the way, Pat Buchanan was the master of this. Why do we want to have news in prime time? Let's have me yelling at Michael Kinsley for an hour, and we'll probably get a lot more viewers. And by golly, he was right. And that's what it has turned into. The downstream effect of that is you have an electorate who only knows what they learn from whatever their, favored narrative shiller is shilling to them. And they don't even recognize the existence of, alternative facts. And so what you end up with is alternative facts. What you end up with is or as some would call them, hate facts. What you end up with is a dumbed down electorate who literally cannot make reasonable electoral decisions about policy matters, which, by the way, you may have noticed, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we're not.
No. And I think it's even worse than that, because what you end up with is activists who regularly watch one channel or another. And then the rest of the people who are just like, I don't know, I'll just go, oh, I like this guy or that gal, and I'll just watch that. And they pick up and then they talk to their friends, some of who may be more in the activist category. And so like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. President Trump was like peeing on hookers. Oh, that's really bad. And who has time, I got to move these TVs, I've got to do I've got work to do. I don't have time to be paying attention to all this crap.
Yeah, well, that's the other problem. Chris was telling me earlier this week about this customer that she has, and they got into a somewhat political conversation because obviously with customers, you don't, there's a couple of things you probably shouldn't talk about, politics and religion being one of the top two.
Number two, yeah.
And he just happened to say, apparently, yeah, I'm not so sure this Joe Biden is a very good president. Really? I'm shocked to learn this. And by the way, I suspect this was a person that happily pulled the lever for Joe Biden in 2020.
Exactly. Based on, very little knowledge, just on whatever narratives are out there that Trump was crazy. He was going to start World War III. He's a racist. He's a Nazi, blah, blah, blah. Joe Biden's a staid, known entity. He's middle of the road, none of which is true. And look what we got. I mean, we literally predicted all the things that would happen.
Anybody who's watched Joe Biden for the last 50 years has got to know that the man is, first of all, a dolt.
A complete dolt.
I mean, Joe Biden is just dumb.
Yeah.
And that's why he was called in the Senate Slow Joe Biden. He's not a smart fella.
No.
And he is an opportunist, and he is a grifter, and he always has been.
And he's quite adept at that. Incredibly adept at that.
Yes, well, that doesn't require intelligence, just a rather
No,
low
absolutely not.
animal cunning to be able to pull
Well,
that
that's
off.
just it. That's what he has. He has that. He's got that closer's mentality, right? Always be
closing. Coffee is for closers.
I mean, and it's worked out for him. I mean, this guy has never held a private sector job. Ever. Well, except when he was a lifeguard.
Yes. In the days when he was consorting with the likes of Corn Pop and what have you.
I mean, he has fumbled his way to the top just by sticking around. He was head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Again, just by sticking around, because the Senate runs everything on seniority.
And that was for like almost 20 years. Why? I mean, everybody knew that he had no clue. I mean, what was it? Gates?
Yeah.
Robert Gates?
Robert Gates, who just said Joe Biden has been wrong about
everything.
Every foreign policy decision. I mean, he was the only guy in the Obama administration who, when they said, hey, we think we found Osama bin Laden, we can kill him.
No, we shouldn't get him.
No, man, I tell you, not sure that's the right idea. Yeah, come on, man.
Is that what we should do?
And I think if the news had ever got out that the administration had actually found and had actionable intelligence on Osama bin Laden, and they had said, don't do it, much like Bill Clinton did in the late 1990s.
Well, I was about to bring that up, yeah. He got away with it because nothing, well, I guess the World Trade Center bombing wasn't, that was it Sheikh or Khalid, whatever his name is.
Yeah,
Khalid
Sheikh Mohammed or whatever.
Yeah,
was that who it was?
I think that's right.
Yeah, they're all called Khalid,
Mohammed
Khalid, and
Sheikh, Ibn
Nasr, and whatever. It's like me trying to pronounce French names. I'm sorry. La Follette?
You are now Lefebvre.
Yeah, Lefebvre. Yeah, it's like I look at in Canada, the guy that runs the Conservative Party, Pierre.
Oh God.
Poilievre. I don't know. I can't pronounce it. I'm
Pepperman.
I'm an American. Heck,
Yeah,
I lived in the Netherlands for friggin' 3 years, and I could barely speak Dutch at the end of it. I didn't get much beyond,
How much is that?
Goeiemorgen.
Where is the red light district?
Which reminds me, when I was over there, AFN, the American Armed Forces Network, used to have these things that, learn German. Wo ist der Bahnhof? Where is the train station? And, the problem with that is you're not going to learn off a, 30-second PSA, one per day, how to speak German. And if you ever make the mistake of going up to a German and going, wo ist der Bahnhof? Ja. Nach links biegen. Gehen Sie immer geradeaus. Nach der zweiten Ampel nach rechts biegen. Und dann, yeah, okay.
Slower, please.
Yeah, sorry. I have no idea what an ample is or what links are or what the heck biegen means. So.
You just point.
Thanks.
Yeah.
But anyway,
understanding the answers all.
I worked at the time as a volunteer broadcaster at the Canadian Forces Network at where I was stationed at Headquarters Allied Forces Central Europe in Brunsum, the Netherlands. And so I made up this whole series of, learn German and learn Dutch on CFNB. And my phrases like, die Tintenfisch hat die Katze gegessen. The octopus has eaten the cat. So all of my phrases were just these outlandish things that clearly you could never lose, but it was
It's
just
much dirtier in the original Dutch.
yeah, but it was just making fun of the stupid idea that you could learn a foreign language on listening to a PSA on AFN.
Yeah, well, how do we get on this topic?
I don't know. How do we get on any topic?
Random chance. Spin the wheel. That's what we need. We need a wheel.
By the way, a commenter in chat has mentioned this, and it did just happen because I got a long message today about how this does not affect us. However, it may affect some of our vendors, and so we may need to change payment information or whatever. Federal regulators just kited into Silicon Valley Bank and shut that bad boy down.
Yeah, I saw that. I didn't even know it was stressed. But apparently there
apparently neither did anybody else.
Yeah. And poor venture capitalists and Silicon Valley entrepreneurs.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the biggest banking loss since 2008.
2008. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, which I can accept that it's probably a sort of isolated case because it is a bit of a specialized bank. However, when you see the layoffs and other things that are going on in the tech industry, and the bigs too. I mean, Meta, Alphabet, Microsoft. I mean, they've all been laying off a lot of people. Not IBM. One of the other big ones just laid off a bunch of people or announced that they're going to lay off a bunch of people. You start to wonder, has the appetite for new gadgets and apps and whatever else, which seem to be almost solely based on entertainment now and not, or communications and not on actual productivity. Has it run its course? I don't want to call it a bubble, but is there any real value being added in that area anymore? Especially with limited resources. We got the semiconductor stuff going on, which affects it tangentially. It's not a direct effect, but it does affect it if you're putting out these these apps and programs that use up a lot of space,
Well, the interesting thing about this is if I'm in the tech industry up in, the San Francisco area, and I'm looking for venture capital and investment and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's probably my go-to guy. How much of my money is now evaporated?
Right.
Oh, by the way, apropos of nothing, it turns out that the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank dumped about $3.5 million worth of stock in the last 2 weeks.
That may have been what triggered the sell-off, because that's what precipitated this takeover by the FDIC, was that there was a drop in the share price of like 60%, which of course triggers an automatic suspension of trading. But I don't know, and that's what I don't know. It seemed like they had more assets than they did liabilities, but it may be that those assets aren't producing, and so those assets are turning into liabilities. So I don't know. I've not seen any of the real details yet, but the fact that they kind of had a bank run put them in a really awful position. And the owner, the umbrella corporation that owns it, essentially it seems like they sort of bailed and tried to get out while they could. I mean, extricate what they could personally.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it.
It's all going to get clawed back, but it's not a good thing. I don't know what signal that makes, though. I mean, you could interpret it so many different ways. Could be an isolated incident. It could be a symptom of something bigger coming.
Well, it has certainly affected banking stocks in the sector as a whole.
Mhm, mhm. And of
So,
course it would.
yeah, so there's at least some fear that this is a harbinger of some fundamental problem in the banking industry. Now, that could just be
Well,
panic because it is the market.
I wondered how much of this is connected to FTX too. Um, it doesn't seem obvious, but they run in the same spaces. When you're talking venture capital, I mean, you don't know where that money goes. It goes all over. It's spread as wide as possible.
Right.
Um, if there were losses, if this bank or its owner um, invested heavily in FTX to kind of hedge their bets, who knows? I
The
mean, I don't know.
the problem with this is not just the venture capitalists. I mean, that's what they do. They put their money at risk, and presumably
Yeah, and thank
they,
God they do.
they have enough money to do that. And occasionally,
Right,
you're going to get caught. However, you still have commercial banking customers there.
right.
They're the ones who largely get
They get
screwed
screwed very badly. Yeah.
over something like this. I never thought I would say it, but I think maybe overturning Glass-Steagall was a mistake.
Oh, I thought you were going to say that the FDIC was actually a good program started by FDR.
No, I didn't say that, but I I think maybe having that firewall between commercial banking and investment banking and preventing the consolidation of the banking industry, I think that may have been a not a bad idea. God, I hate to say it.
I I understand. I just wonder how much difference it would have made. I mean,
Well, I mean,
Goldman's.
look at it right now. If you don't bank at Bank of America, Wells Fargo, I mean, largely there are other banks, but Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citibank, and there's maybe one or two others I could think of.
Uh,
Uh,
well, BB&T is almost all insurance now. Um, Deutsche Bank, but that's really investment.
yeah,
No,
but
what's
I
the
mean,
one?
I'm
Oh,
just talking about
TD Bank.
commercial. I'm
TD
just
Bank.
talking about commercial banking, though.
Yeah, TD Bank. Yeah, there's still a few. Scotiabank actually is kind of big in at least in the East. It's a Canadian bank.
Yeah, but there's a lot fewer banks than there used to be, and
Oh yeah.
you have a lot fewer choices, and
Well, during all the stress tests and stuff, a lot of those smaller banks, regional banks, got bought up by the bigger banks. I mean, Wells Fargo, I mean, bought Wachovia, which was
yeah,
its own big bank.
Wells Fargo alone came out of that pretty well. Citi bought
Yeah,
WAMU.
right. I mean, those are huge acquisitions and placed them all over the map. Um, so yeah, though it's the banking industry has definitely changed. And I, for one, am not big on consolidation. I find that to be. I understand that there are some good things that can come of it. You will see that, but I'm absolutely aware of all the bad things that can come of it. I mean, we saw that in the automotive industry. Before uh, the unionization, like what's the act? I guess the Labor Union Act was put in place. We had, I don't know, hundreds of different car companies. And, many of them would fail, much like restaurants, right? They would fail every year. Some would get bought up. But I mean, in our heyday, at the beginning of really the automotive revolution, we had at least 40 to 50 different car companies doing all kinds of innovations and different stuff. And it was absolutely fascinating. And they were driving down the price of vehicles. And then we ended up with, unionization, government-backed labor unions, and the Big Four,
Yeah,
all of whom have had to be bailed out by the
which
federal government.
which became the big three.
Yeah, which became the Big Three, right? I mean, it's and you see this every time there's consolidation, and I'm I'm not a big fan of antitrust laws, um, but I got to admit that there is some justification there for why they've been put in place. Um, I hear people, and we've talked about this a bunch, about both our interest and trepidation about it with the big tech, right? And
Yeah,
putting
because it
them
seems
under,
insoluble.
right.
Because let's go back to banking. Okay, I can have 20 banks in my town. And the trouble with that is that each one of those banks is probably financially more precarious than Wells Fargo.
Overall, yeah.
And therefore, they are much more prone to failure because of one, bad investment. Now, I think you eliminate some of that problem by putting the firewall up between, again, commercial and investment banking. You can be an investment bank, you can be a commercial bank, you can't be both. Because one of the reasons why 2008 was so disastrous was because you had these banks that had investment arms, and those investment arms made some bad calls, and there was a lot of skullduggery going on with Moody's and Standard and Poor's
Yes.
giving triple A ratings to what can only be charitably called shit, and the
Yeah,
banks
the
then turning
tranches
around
and
and,
stuff.
and selling these things, and as we now famously know from a couple of movies, once the default rate hits 8%, that whole house of cards comes tumbling down. And
Yeah.
when you are exposed on the long side for, $115 billion, you're not just taking down the investment bank, you're taking down the commercial bank as well. That's exactly what happened to WAMU. They just
Yeah.
got
And
destroyed.
well, that's what happened to, what was the other, not Bear Stearns.
Yeah, well, it did happen to Bear
JW Morgan.
Stearns, but they're
It
not a
happened to Bear
commercial,
Stearns.
but they're not a commercial bank, so we don't care.
JW Morgan.
Yes, J.P. Morgan.
JP Morgan.
J.P. Morgan Chase, but there was enough of a space between J.P. Morgan and Chase
And
Manhattan
Chase. Yeah.
that Chase could survive and prosper. Um, that firewall, as dumb as it seemed, and for years I thought it was dumb. And by the way, I'm one of the people who thought, hey, they're finally getting rid of Glass-Steagall, this stupid Depression era relic. Maybe not. I mean, sure, banking would then go back to being super boring and just giving out home mortgages and business loans, I guess. And you wouldn't have the opportunity for, day trading at Wells Fargo. But I'm not sure that's an entirely bad thing. And it would at least insulate the commercial sector from the failures at investment banks. And by the way, I think it might eliminate the too big to fail problem.
Well, again, that's the consolidation thing. I agree with you. The too big to fail thing is what uh, really caused our problems in 2007, 2008. I mean, it didn't cause it exacerbated greatly the when we bailed them out, and we have to. I'll never forget George Bush going in there and saying, oh, well, we're going to have to destroy capitalism to save it, or something like that. And it was just like, what? Let them fail. Oh no, it's way too, yeah, it's way too much for who? You know, it, I don't have $250,000 in a bank anywhere.
By the way, we have a
I'm
comment.
protected.
We have someone in the comments. You're saying consolidation happens naturally or because government actions drive it, perhaps on behalf of the big players. Let's put a pin in that because that's an interesting discussion,
Yeah.
and we'll come back to that. But speaking of the FDIC, which you clearly don't have a lot of respect for,
Hey, that's not true. I think it's actually one of the few programs that came out of the New Deal era that has worked and has helped stave off banking panics.
Okay, because my argument is that the way that we fixed 2008, or the way that we should have fixed 2008, was to say, okay, well, we have a choice. We can give a shit ton of money to these banks and we can socialize their losses.
Right.
Or we can put a shitload of money in the FDIC and make all the depositors whole. And by the way, we'll waive the $10,000 limit on accounts.
Right.
We'll make sure. No, 250,000 was for savings and loans. For checking, for cash accounts, I believe it's $10,000.
Oh, for checking and cash. Yeah.
And I would have just said, look, we don't care how much money you have. You're getting it back. And paid.
It would have been way cheaper.
It would have been cheaper to pay the depositors back. Now, when you lose those banks,
there's going to be some consolidation that goes on.
Yeah,
but there will also be some new banks that come up.
Yeah, so it just
nothing
seems
more fertile than a burned and slashed field.
Well, that's true. But I think that would have been a better way of solving that crisis than, because basically what we told all these big banks is that if you make bad bets on the economy, and by the way, government had plenty of hand in this. We can go back over how the government basically incentivized in every way these banks to give out as many mortgages as possible and turn on the tap, forget credit worthiness. You just loan the money because after all, everyone deserves to buy a home, just like everyone deserves to go to college. Both of those two things clearly false. But that was our government pushed that way. But then to solve it, what we told the banks was, okay, we know that you were creating these huge derivative markets based on assets that you knew were full of B and triple B and triple C crap that you were calling triple A. And that you were not only selling these directly, but you were creating derivative instruments based on those to magnify
the ratings agencies have never suffered anything.
No, nobody went to jail. Nobody did anything. And what we told them was, okay, you've done a bad thing. And we don't want to, but we're going to pay you for it. But you got to promise us you'll never do this again. But
recidivism.
If you do, then we'll probably do the same thing because you're too big to fail.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And too
that's
big
exactly what keeps happening.
And too big to fail is single point of failure.
Well, that's right. I hate to go back to chaos theory, even though I love it. But that's chaos theory in a nutshell. The fewer points of failure you have, the more chaos is introduced to the system. So when you have that one point of failure, you get hurricanes from a butterfly's wings. I mean, that's just how it works. You need to have a lot more diversity. Hey, there's that word. We don't use it this way anymore. But you have a lot more diversity in choice for consumers than you have many points of possible failure, and literally some of them will fail.
Well, see, that's
okay because there's so much competition, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, see, that's the trade-off you make. Either we consolidate everything, and by the way, so much of business in this country is consolidated. Whether it is radio broadcasting, Spectrum, Infinity,
Clear Channel,
and Clear Channel. There you go.
That's it.
Those are your three radio companies. That's it. Doesn't matter that you have 100 radio stations in your city. They're probably all broadcasting from the same Clear Channel facility somewhere downtown. Yep. So your problem is, okay, if we have that system, if one of these things fails, it can take the whole kit and caboodle down with it. Now, the chances of that failure tend to be much smaller.
True, yeah.
And there'll be a longer mean time between failures, to bring in an engineering term. So your MBTF is much longer, well, hopefully. On the other hand, if you have 30 or 40 banks, in this case, 50 banks, okay, one of them is going to go under on a fairly regular basis. And so there will not be this long period of stability and then a god awful, horrific apocalypse of catastrophe that will last 2 or 3 years. What there will be are these little minor catastrophes every year. So what do you want to live with? And at this point, based on what the cost of a major catastrophe could be, I think I'm much happier living with small, minor catastrophes.
Minor contagion is always better than major contagion.
But see, now we're back to regulation. Now we're back to the government. The same people who oversaw the banking crisis of 2008 being the ones who say, okay, well, we'll look over, all of these 50, 60, 100 banks, and we'll make sure that, we'll regulate the hell out of them. Will you?
Just like they did, what's his face? Who's the guy that like ripped off all those rich people in New York?
Bernie Madoff.
Yeah, Bernie Madoff was like first name basis with all the SEC regulators and like, oh, that was all good. Don't worry about it. Like, okay, good, Bernie, we love you. And then, of course, the inevitable pyramid collapses.
Well, that's how pyramid schemes work. I'm surprised people still are, I still get occasional calls from this person or that person that I knew 5 years ago.
Have you heard of Amway?
Yeah, exactly.
At bottom, though, this is almost always, I can only think of one example off the top of that. This is almost always a government, if not driven, at least exacerbated problem.
Which gets us back to the question that was asked by our listener. Yes, this is almost always caused by government action. Right. And, we talk about this all the time, regulatory capture.
Yes.
The second that you set up a regulator for an industry, the clock is ticking for the moment when that industry takes over that regulator.
Right.
And so what you end up with, as we've probably mentioned thousands of times, the Secretary of the Treasury is always a former or future executive at Goldman Sachs. Often both.
True. And then also sometimes a former senator and a governor of New Jersey. What I think the big signal about this is when you hear these companies, especially the larger companies who are being regulated, begging for new regulations. No, this act or this bill, you know what? Regulate us. We think you're right. We should be controlled. You should be in charge of us.
I don't even trust myself.
Right.
And it's almost always a regulation that raises a barrier to entry to competition.
Exactly. That's what they want. Right here in my home state. So, and I pointed this out to my son, one of my sons. The Dominion Power is basically the provider of power to pretty much all of at least Eastern Virginia, and certainly Northern Virginia. There's some bill in Congress or in the Virginia legislature to put some more regulations on Dominion that will reduce rates, and it'll save Virginian consumers $350 million. That's like, I can't remember what they said. It was something like $6 or $7 a month on your bills. It was okay. And then this whole thing was paid for by Dominion Energy. So it's like, and so I kind of quizzed him. I was like, well, so what did you think of that? I was like, well, some of those numbers sound a little weird. And I was like, yeah. I was like, why did Dominion pay for that? Like, well, maybe, they just think it's a good idea. I was like, no. Either there's a worse bill in place that's going to completely not let them charge more, or make them charge less, or they're trying to keep some competition out. I mean, when they're paying money We're advertising a bill that's going to cost them money. They're doing it for a reason. They're trying to minimize a loss or maximize a gain. That's the only two reasons. And again, it's just whenever I hear a company begging for regulation or encouraging people to vote more regulation of their industry, I'm like, yeah, you're in bed with somebody. There's something else here going on. I don't know what it is, but there's something going on.
Yeah, because I don't trust in that level of altruism from corporations.
No, there isn't. That doesn't exist. They're in the business of making money, and I want them to make money. Now, I want them to make as little money off me as possible, sure, but they provide me power. I want to make them to make their savings outside of me, so they can charge me less. I don't want them to come up with some rate structure that now, oh, you're going to get $6 or $7 less a month. Am I though? I mean, is that really what's going to happen?
Well, again, most of the time, this I don't think it's universally true, but most of the time, when you're talking about power companies, you're already talking about heavily regulated industries.
Super regulated.
And you're generally talking about not only regulated companies, but regulated monopolies.
Well, of course. Yeah, absolutely. So competition isn't necessarily the right thing. So my only thinking here is that there is another competing bill, that would not allow them to charge, or would reduce their flexibility, or would somehow impede their ability to raise rates when necessary or something. I mean, there's something that they're actually after, and it's not to like lower their rates. You don't pay money to lower your rates. You just lower your rates.
Yeah, if that was the only problem, you could just do that unilaterally.
You don't need anybody to handcuff you down to do that.
All right. Well, what else did I want to talk about today? I can't even think about what I had on my mind. I know that we talked about it last week, or actually, we didn't talk about it last week. We spent 2 hours talking about it after we got off the podcast, which is, and I think it's a fascinating story. It is largely humorous, and we don't know how it's going to turn out, but it's this high school teacher in Canada who was a shop teacher wearing the size Z fake breasts and going to school. And he just said, "Oh yeah, I'm a woman now." And everybody just said, "Okay, well, I guess you can wear your size Z fake breasts to school and work in the shop. Nothing we can do about it. That's your true identity." Well, as it turns out, this guy is only wearing these fake breasts and is only masquerading as a woman. And I use the term masquerading intentionally because this is all a work. Yeah, because when he's not at school, he's just walking around in a sweater and and
it is masquerade because
a golf shirt.
Everything is overemphasized.
And so last week, what they told him was, "Okay, we're going to suspend you because you're not really a woman. You're fake. You're a faker." Which, okay, that's fine because it's actually true. He is. However, who are they to say that?
Right. They made the rules.
Because the rule is, the rule is, if you tell us that you identify as a woman, then we have to treat you as a woman, and there certainly can't be any negative employment consequences or anything like that. You're a woman, and we have to accommodate you as a woman and treat you as a woman. We can't dead name you, we can't misgender you, because this is how you feel. Okay, so now who are you to tell me how I feel? So the fact that I do want to come to school this way, and by the way, and there were some people who picked up on this a long time ago. This is not a kink or a fetish. This guy's trying to make a point.
Yes.
And now they're upset. They're upset at his point, and they are going to suspend him and do all of this stuff. But again, his argument.
The only reason he was actually suspended is because they figured out finally.
Yeah, finally after a year. But again, it seems to me his argument in defense is, who are they to say
Right.
what I truly feel?
And this is
Maybe,
Canadian law.
yeah, maybe I'm gender fluid. Maybe sometime I feel like a man and sometime I feel like a woman. And you know what?
Sometimes I feel like a nut, and sometimes I don't.
It's none of their damn business. And the problem is that the arguments that they've used to actually impose this policy is all based on you. How do you feel about
It's
this?
all subjective feeling. That's correct.
Yeah, and it's the subjective feeling of the person who tells them, I feel this way. So now they want to come back and rewrite the rules and say, no, 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 no. We don't think you're being authentic in your, well, you don't have
You
access.
don't get to judge that. That's
You don't
not
get to
for
judge
you
that.
judge.
You have no access to my inner life. You
Matter
don't
of
know
fact,
what
you
I
can't
do.
even define what a woman is. So how can you say I'm not a woman? Unless you have something to compare it to,
Yeah, what is the
you have
objective
no
standard?
rubric.
And I frankly, I think the guy is brilliant. Now, I think he's going to get
Guys
fired.
love this man.
I think he's going to lose his job at the school. But
Calculated risk.
pointing out this type of hypocrisy is not without its utility.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, it's highly favored from those of us who care to live in reality and not this fantasy world that far too many people are happy to live in, even though it's unlivable. You can't live in it. It doesn't even make any sense. You now got, just as another example, you have, and they've been pushing this for a while, but you've got these trans right activists saying that, if you don't want to sleep with somebody who has different genitals than you're normally used to, well, you're transphobic.
Oh yeah, that's the new thing. You're transphobic if you won't date a trans woman.
Yeah, no.
No, sorry, that's not true. I mean, you're not supposed to say that.
But yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You have a dick. That's just not gonna work for me.
I already got one.
Yeah,
I need the opposite
I know.
part.
Yeah, I know how those work. I'm, real up on that. I don't need to have more experience with it.
Yeah, that's just, yeah.
Well,
Not my thing.
there was an interesting article this week, and I wish I'd have kept the link. It's by a black professor who starts off, basically, the article can be condensed in about 3 sentences. I'm a black guy. I'm a black studies professor. I firmly believe in this white privilege stuff and all the racism stuff, and I'm perfectly happy with the 1619 stuff. I have been doing stuff about black studies for 20 years. And now these woke students that are coming into my class are freaking nuts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, sort of
It's this
half red pilled, quarter red pilled.
Yeah, it's this, but this disconnection from reality, it can't.
Well, of course it can't go on.
It can't go on.
I mean, what is it? Rudyard Kipling, the copybook.
The gods of the copybook headings.
Right. I mean, eventually it all comes to roost. I mean, you can only deny reality for so long. And denying reality does not create a new reality. It just furthers a fantasy. It just creates an unreal world. And when you expect others to abide by it, well, they're not going to. I mean, some will. Some will do so willingly.
And some will pretend to do so just to, avoid trouble.
Go along to get along. Sure. But eventually, and this is the way the left always works, is they push too far. They sense no resistance, so they keep pushing. And then all of a sudden they hit bedrock, and it's like, well, now you're just all bigots. And it's like, okay, well, then we're all bigots. Now we're going to push back.
But the weird thing is that sometimes I don't even realize how much they're beclowning themselves. Like today, in Florida, Nikki Fried.
Oh my God, that idiot.
Yeah, well, she did kind of a bad thing. So she was talking about all these very necessary books for children that Ron DeSantis is taking out of the
child
school.
porn. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and Ron DeSantis posted on a video a page of this book that was actually in a middle school library, which basically gave step-by-step instructions on how to prepare yourself for anal sex using a butt plug and all this other stuff. And she took a screenshot of one of those images and said, "So is the governor just posting porn now?" Oh, okay. You're admitting it's porn then. So this pornography.
Does the elevator not skip some floors there?
So if this is indeed pornography, why do you want it in our schools? Obviously, if it is so bad that we can't post it on Twitter
or on national TV,
then why are kids looking at it?
How this isn't a difficult concept. I mean, this is actually a really simple concept. Even Potter Stewart said, well, you might not be able to define pornography, but I know it when I see it.
When I see it.
And this is clearly pornography. I mean, and that's what I thought was so brilliant about DeSantis's press conference. He keeps taking all these heat. Well, they're banning books and they're hating on trans people. It's like, okay, here, we're going to show you. Oh, you can't show this on TV? Oh, matter of fact, the FCC will come down on you if you actually...
The FCC will fine you thousands and thousands of dollars if you broadcast.
But you're okay with people having this in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade classes? This is porn. We're just trying to keep porn out of the schools. That's all it is. Doesn't matter what kind of porn. This could have been teaching you how to, fondle a breast when you're like 6 years old.
Well, I see this all the time on social media. The Republicans are only going on this trans thing because they're trying to push an agenda because Trump lost. No, why weren't the Republicans worried about trans stuff 10, 15 years ago?
Because nobody was. Not even the trans people.
A, nobody was, and B, you weren't trying to have drag shows in front of children.
Right.
I don't really care what fuckery you get up to as a consenting adult.
Exactly.
Once you start pulling kids in, I begin to care a lot.
Yeah. And that's always been the rule. Keep it to yourself. Fine. I do not give two shits if you... I've met not lots, but I've met some trans people, or at least as we used to call them, trannies, dressing, and they were always men dressing up to be women. Fine.
Hell, Milton Berle did it on national TV in the 1950s.
But Wilson made a fucking career out of it.
And look, you could have gone down to Bourbon Street, New Orleans, anytime in the late 60s and early 70s, and indeed...
You don't take kids there either.
Most parents probably wouldn't. In 1973, my parents did.
You're an exceptional kid.
Yeah, I must have been. And how about my stepsister, who was 2 years younger? And I learned at that tender young age, there are men who dress up as women and dance on stages on Bourbon Street.
Huh.
Okay. Clearly inappropriate for my parents to have taken me there.
And yet,
that's a discussion.
Where you are.
That's a discussion I should have with my family. However, the fact is, it was right there on Bourbon Street. Everybody knew it was there. And you would just go get your strawberry hurricanes and you'd sit there and you would watch the transsexuals on stage in the bar. And no one cared. This is, by the way, Louisiana. I mean, if there's any place that's part of the Bible Belt, it's Louisiana. Now, granted, New Orleans is a bit of an exception to that. New Orleans has always been a relatively wild town anyway. But yeah, you're right. This stuff has been around a long time. And you're right. Nobody gave a shit about it 10 years ago.
No.
And the only reason they
You
give a
saw a
shit.
woman in your bathroom as a guy, you were like, oh, it's tranny, whatever.
Okay.
Who
Yeah.
cares?
In fact, there is a guy that hangs out in Balboa Park here in San Diego. He's there almost every day, wearing a dress, low pumps, a wig, full makeup.
Does he have a wide stance?
I presume that he does. Okay, yeah, who cares? I mean, literally,
Exactly.
who cares? But then, once you start saying, okay, well, how about a family-friendly drag show? Okay, well, I don't believe that there is any such thing. And how about a family-friendly stripper show?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's have a family-friendly stripper show with Eastern European starlets coming over and like shaking it in
Yeah,
your space.
I don't want kids there either. There's a lot of things that I don't want kids to do.
Right.
When they turn 18, I cease to care what it is that
I
they
mean,
do.
wasn't Tipper Gore at the forefront of the ratings system?
Oh yeah, boy, that brings back some memories back into the early '90s when Tipper Gore,
Early 80s.
or '80s actually, yeah, because Dee Snider from
Dee Snider
Twisted
went
Sister had to
toe-to-toe
go to
with him, yeah.
Congress, and she was, saying, this rock music, and of course that was the time of the Satanic Panic and all of that other stuff
You
as well.
did love Satan.
Yeah, yeah, play the records backwards. Um,
Who does that?
Yeah, at some point you're just looking for something. Now you're just making shit up to be upset about. Um, and the weird thing about that is that they went after groups like Black Sabbath. Now, okay, I understand the Black Sabbath name might have
It
some
gives you a little bit of a clue.
satanic conversations, but have you ever actually listened to the lyrics of those songs?
Right.
I mean, there's a fair amount of Christianity that gets shoehorned into Black Sabbath's music.
Well, in order to justify their existence, it would have to, because otherwise, who are you? You can't exist light without dark, evil without good.
Yeah, but their music is basically largely on the side of good. I mean, Ozzy Osbourne was, blitzed out of his mind for most of that time. But
I don't think he wrote most of the songs anyway, but
yeah, well,
I think Richie
that's true.
Blackmore
He
had
was
a lot
just
of
he was just the front man. But yeah, we care because kids are involved.
Judas Priest.
Yeah. Don't mess with kids and we won't be.
And that's literally
And
that
we can go back to not caring. You know what?
this is an age-old rule. This is not something new. This is something that has, I mean, to the point where it's probably passed down genetically, that you don't fuck with our kids, period. You can do lots of stuff. And, some people might care. We've gotten to a really good point, I thought, in the past 30 years or so, where we're like, a lot of people are just like, I don't care. Do what you want. So it didn't hurt me. And now it's like, oh, no. You have to care. And your kids have to care. Matter of fact, you're teaching them wrong.
Bake the
We
cake,
need to
big.
teach you how to teach them so that we're more acceptable. Like, well, you're a freak. So just get used to it.
Well, the problem is, and this is, by the way, the problem with any activist, right? You're whatever it is that you're an activist about, that problem can never be solved, ever.
Exactly. Right.
And if it looks like it's being solved, then you just have to escalate it and move to a next level.
Well, you don't want to work yourself out of a job.
Exactly. So, we're just asking for tolerance. Okay.
No, you're not.
Okay. Here you go. You got tolerance. Well, we're asking for acceptance.
I would say
Okay.
from the
Okay.
90s
We'll
to
accept you.
well, that's what I think from the 90s to the late 2000s was probably the most socially acceptable period of America, at least. um, ever, that nobody gave a shit if you were interracial marriage or
Yes, but see, not giving a shit is no longer enough.
that's just it.
I
The
need
lights will
I
come.
need
People will be made
toleration,
to care.
and then when I get that, I get acceptance, and then when I get that, I need celebration. Now I need you as an active participant.
Yeah. Well,
Otherwise,
fine.
you're a hater.
Well, okay, I'm a hater.
So it's it's not even enough. And by the way, we're not even being specific about trans or whatever.
No,
Um,
that's right, because it's
it's
everything,
it's a whole
and
it's
it's the
everything.
same playbook every single time.
And
And so
now
the thing is,
and
people are getting done with it. They're just tired of being forced to care. You know, we only have so much capacity within each and every day to give a shit about anything. We give a shit about our job because, well, we kind of have to.
yeah, we got to keep a roof
Um,
over our head. We got to keep food on the table. So
and the
that's
reason we give a shit about our job is because the most important thing is we give a shit about our families. We give a shit about eating. We give a shit about, like, having things like lights and heat, and hopefully a little bit of entertainment. We can have a TV, a phone. I mean, these are our priorities. You want to do you and hang out and do freaky stuff? You know what? You go for it, man. That's awesome.
but it doesn't mean that I have to be involved in it.
No,
Doesn't mean that why do you need my not
right.
my tacit acceptance, not my tolerance. Why do you need me to affirm
Accept
it?
you. Your problem is you can't accept you. Accept you, just like I've accepted me. I don't need anybody else's approval. Why do you need anybody else's approval? I don't give two shits what people tell me about how I live my life, because
Yeah,
I've made these informed decisions to do it the way I want to do it.
it's my life. It's not your life. It doesn't affect you.
Right? So fuck off. Go do your own thing. You know what? I might even celebrate some little thing with you just because I like you. I've been to a same sex marriage before, and I've been to same sex, uh, anniversaries, and like big anniversaries and stuff. I mean, I don't agree with same sex marriage, but they do their thing. Doesn't affect me. Doesn't hurt me at all. So I'll celebrate with them. I don't care. Doesn't bother me. But if you forced me to do it, if I'm forced to do it, oh,
Bake the cake, bigot.
yeah, right. It's like I always tell my wife, it's like, I don't know why you try to control me. I can't even control myself. So, like, just stop.
Yeah, that's pretty common. Um, but that seems to be this paradigm we're in. And what's really interesting is how much of this attitude really does seem to infect sort of the Generation Z people.
I think it's a little bit more. I mean, you're right that it does. Now, see, I've got three Generation Z kids, and they're not affected by it at all. And
Well, first of
the
all, you don't
friends,
send them to public school. Second of all,
true, yeah.
and
Um,
second of all, none of them have gone through their full college experience yet.
well, my son, my oldest, is ending his sophomore year, and he's on his way to getting his MBA in 5 years. I mean, and he chose a good school. My younger son is going to be a senior next year. He's definitely a little more crazy. I mean, but my kids are, and again, that's parental influence.
Yeah,
Catholic school,
just look at the number of kids who are born out of wedlock now.
exactly. Yeah, no, they have a stable influence. They see a family unit as the best way to have a family and be a family. Um, their friends are almost, not all of them, but almost all of them have, mother and father of the kid live together, are married, that kind of thing. It makes a huge difference. And I mean, Thomas Sowell, I mean, hell, Milton Friedman was saying this literally decades ago. Uh, you know, graduate high school, get married, then have kids. It's not an automatic recipe for success, but there's a lot less chance of failure if you can do those three things. And it's proven true over and over
Well,
again.
it's the Larry Elder mantra still today. Don't quit school, get a job, don't leave that job until you have another job.
Exactly.
And get married and
Early.
don't have kids until after you're married.
Exactly. Yeah, none of this having kids before you get married.
Again, this is not a foolproof thing. Obviously,
No,
you never
absolutely
know
not.
what life can throw at you. But
And how successful you can be afterwards. But if you at least try to live by the precepts, or the underlying ethos of it, you're going to have a much more successful life. You're going to have much more successful kids than people who just completely eschew that.
and by the way, this
Nothing
this always
guaranteed.
gets painted as being some sort of religious thing.
It's
I
not.
mean,
It's
it can
literally
be.
based on statistics.
Yeah, but it's literally how the world works.
Right.
And if you decide to live a lifestyle that, does all of the things that tends to make you unsuccessful, then don't
How
be too
many
surprised
people
if you're
live
unsuccessful.
together before they get married? I mean, that's pretty common. Have sex before they get married. Very common. That was not common, 50, 60 years ago. 60 years ago. But I mean, it's fairly common now. Okay. But you have the ability to put off having kids outside of abortion that will give you a chance to figure out if you're compatible. And I think that's a great thing. I think that's wonderful that people take time to figure out, hey, can we do this long term?
Well, the problem is, I think that it has become so pervasive in our society. I think there was a point somewhere around, if you go back to the late 1960s, Daniel Patrick Moynihan was talking about the rates of illegitimacy in the black community.
Wrote an entire report about it that nobody's ever seen.
Wrote an entire report about it. He was a Democrat, by the way, just in case anybody wanted to know. A Northern Democrat.
Yeah.
But anyway, the problem was that at that time, the black rate of illegitimacy was approaching 70%, which seemed like a really bad thing, especially since the rate of black illegitimacy, literally a generation previous, was like 25%.
If that, yeah.
And so there was
matter of fact, a generation and a half before that, the illegitimate births to the black cohort was actually less than to the white cohort.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's true. I don't think it was a generation earlier, but I think it was like 30,
About a generation
40
and a half,
or
two
50 years.
Yeah.
So that was in the late 60s. Well, guess what? And of course, everybody just saw that as being, you're just denigrating black people because they're obviously being discriminated against. It's difficult for them to raise a family. If it was that difficult for white people, they'd have similar rates of illegitimacy. Well, guess what? Now they do.
Yes.
And so the rate of illegitimacy among whites has now topped 50%.
Yep.
And what you end up
And not
with,
just here either.
oh, not just here. Oh, yeah, it's everywhere,
Yep.
and or everywhere in the West, I should say. And what you're ending up with, and this is one of the things. And again, when we talk about these things, there's a bell curve, and there's obviously, those outliers on the bell curve that are different. But in the real middle of the bell curve, what you have now is a generation, and we're rapidly approaching a second generation, who really have no experience with what we'd consider traditional nuclear family life.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that they're capable of building it. There is this guy, I think we've talked about him before, this Canadian guy who brings women onto his podcast, usually, young women, and he starts asking them questions about dating. And one of the questions that he
Is
asked...
this the whatever.com guy?
Yeah, it's the whatever.com guy. Yeah. And one of the questions
he's very, very smart, and actually a very how should I say it? He's a very adept interviewer in the way he gets these people to talk without offending them. And he never takes any offense.
Yeah,
But he does push back.
Yeah, he's a pretty low key guy, but he always
Very
has
low key.
he always has a question that he asks them is if you're in a relationship with a guy, and he told you that he didn't want you to go out with your single girlfriends and party on Friday and Saturday nights, what would you do? Well, he doesn't have the right to tell me that. Okay, that's not we all understand he doesn't have the right to tell you that. That's understood. What we're getting at is, do you understand the inherent responsibilities that come with maintaining a relationship? Well, no, they don't. And why would they? They've never seen, in many cases, they've never seen a functioning relationship. Why would they know?
That's right.
Why would they know how to create one for themselves?
Well, and the other thing is they don't, my other favorite question they always brings up is like, well, what do you bring to the table?
Myself. Myself.
Yeah. Okay. Other than that, what else do you have?
Yeah. And by the way, the monumental amount of arrogance. I expect my boyfriend to provide for me financially. I expect him to protect me. I expect him to, take care of me, physically in terms of food and shelter and physical protection. Okay, great. What does he get in return? Me? Of course. I'm the prize. As if there's not a new crop of 18-year-olds coming onto the market every day.
Right. And the thing is, they don't even see how they're setting themselves up. They don't even understand how you're making yourself an ice cream flavor. That's all you are. You're an ice cream flavor. You're not a person.
And by the way, they always get offended at conversations when he turns to body count. They They hate it.
I love those.
Why does that matter?
So have you seen Pearl?
Okay, so what am I getting from you? I'm getting somebody who has been used by 16, 17, 30, 40 guys. Why do you think that you're such a prize? Is it because you think you're hot? And the number of girls that think they're hot on this.
Oh, I know.
Is they have this one. She's a dark-haired girl. I just call her Bangs because she has these.
I know exactly who you're talking.
Dark bangs, she's got this she's got this whiny voice.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. But she's completely delusional.
Yeah, she's completely delusional. And by the way, you say you think she's sexy. Okay, we disagree because as far as I can tell, she's halfway to Italian mother-in-law, and she's only 21, and she thinks that she's a 10. No. In no world,
not go that far.
In no world are you a 10.
Sexy about her, but it's her narcissism is.
It's narcissism.
Turn off. It's a huge turn off.
Yeah, we've built a generation of narcissists. And by the way, guys are no better because guys are animals. And so if these girls are willing to have sex with them, and by the way, they don't even understand that they're the ones who control access to sex. They say, well, these guys have sex all the time. Yeah, who's letting them?
Right.
Yeah, it's not happening, just by strikes of lightning.
Right.
You're allowing them to have access to sex.
And they're all sleeping with the same 20% of guys.
Yeah, that's the thing, because they've all decided I'm the prize. And so I deserve a 6 foot, 6 to 7 figure fella who will take care of me.
Oh God, do you hear them? Have you heard them talk about what should be the average, salary?
250,000.
What?
Okay, if a guy is making $250,000 a year,
he doesn't need you.
And that's the thing. I'm bringing me to the table. No. I'm making $250,000 a year.
Yeah,
you're going to need
to bring me to the table.
I'm the one who's the prize at this table.
Yeah, exactly.
You're in competition with everyone else who wants a piece of that.
Right.
And if you're just, normal college dropout 21-year-old who's kind of cute, you're not in the running, sweetie.
But I dance at the club on weekends, and I have lots of friends, and I go to free parties.
Yeah, and
Do you
by
really
the
pick a
way,
$250,000 give a shit about that shit?
by the way, life is unfair and life is awful.
Yeah.
And so a man at 40 who is established in his career and who is
Oh,
doing
way
fine.
more attractive
And
than a
by the
20 year
way,
old.
he doesn't even have to be a rich guy. He could just be a welder at 40 who's well established in his career. You
If
know
he's
what?
got money.
He's a catch because he has
Absolutely.
established himself.
Yeah.
Um,
He
and
probably owns several properties,
and by
has a
the
lot on several others.
and by the way, the fact that you're young and hot is not an asset.
No,
I mean,
because it's a fleeting,
it's only an
it's a
asset.
perishable good.
Yeah, it's only an what is it Dave Chappelle, right? When he says pussy appreciates like cars, not houses. The whole point of being a young woman, it seems to me, should be to find a decent man, one who will treat you well and one who will respect you, and to build a life with that man. Because it's going to be a heck of a lot harder to wake up at 35 alone and then say, I have no relationship, nothing. How do I get that? Well, you should have been working on that a lot earlier.
And look, women are under a lot more pressure, not externally, actually internally, to kind of get that shit figured out quickly. They try to get their lives figured out pretty damn early. And I respect that and I understand it. Uh, they may not think of it in these terms, but they've only got so many fertile years. And
Yeah, tick
they
tock,
need,
tick tock.
yeah, and they need to know that not only can they be taken care of in times of um, stress or debilitation or whatever, uh, typically pregnancy, that they can depend on that person to be around even as they get older and fatter.
But
And that requires a connection.
yeah,
So,
and by the way, men are of that age are no better
no,
because they have now been conditioned to see women as purely sexual objects.
right.
And why shouldn't they? Because
How they present themselves.
that's how they present themselves. And so it then just becomes this thing to, run up the numbers on whoever they can get. And any girl that'll let them sleep with them, they will. And
Yeah.
they don't have the maturity either. So I do understand in part women's complaint. Men their age are probably not good catches.
No.
Sadly,
But at the same
21-year
time,
old men tend not to be good catches anyway.
no. At least, well, they did, you know, a while ago. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
many.
sure. Back in the days when you were 12 and you owned your own farm in Virginia and you were dead by 40, yeah, there were a lot more.
I'm thinking of my parents. My dad was 20 and my mom was 21 when they got married. And, I was born 6 months to the day later. We're not going to talk about that. But, I mean, there was something to, like you said, being a gatekeeper for the women. Like, yeah, I'll let you in, but are you gonna love me? Love me forever? Do you need me? Will you never leave me? Will you make me so happy for the rest of your life? Will you take me away? Will you make me a wife? I gotta know right now.
Yeah, let me think on it. Um, the There does seem to have been in earlier generations, and which I would include mine, this idea that okay, this is a
Yeah.
yeah, this is a partnership or a relationship, especially one if you want to build a life, you have to look for a partnership.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
there's going to be a lot of give and take, but you're going to be better off in this partnership with one person
Yes.
than you will be going through. And look, every guy goes through the string of women, period, at some point, or at least wanting to go through. Not every guy is capable of doing it, but at least wanting to go through the string of women, period. But at the end of the day, there was an understanding, certainly and I'm what, a half a generation off from you. I think my parents were baby boomers, so I'm the very first of the Generation
You're
Xers.
like 5 years older than me. Not even five.
Yeah.
You don't turn 60 this year, do you?
No, no, I don't.
Yeah, so you're like 4 years older than me.
No,
I
okay.
turned 55 this year.
Okay, well, I guess we are the same generation. Yeah, we are pretty close in age.
Essentially, you're like right at the very, just by how they do the cutoff, you're at the end of the baby boomer
Yeah,
generation.
technically, because I was born in '64, that makes me a baby boomer. However,
Yeah.
since my parents were actual baby boomers, born in 1946
Right.
and 48, that really makes me not a baby boomer. They were the first of the baby boomers.
Right.
Well, when Grandpa got home from the Second World War,
Right.
he had a lot of pent up demand. Let's just put it that way, to put it in economic terms. All those 4 years on that ship really took a toll. So,
Expect it does.
but I think we had the understanding that to build a successful life, you really need to find someone
There are
who can
building
be a
blocks you
partner.
have to do,
Yeah,
and those haven't ever changed. I mean, and that's the thing, is this is not some ideological construct. We know this over literally thousands
thousands
of
of
years
years.
of
Yeah,
civilization. I mean, we're not inventing something new here. This we have known for literally thousands of years.
but
Why not use that knowledge?
but increasingly seems like it's lost knowledge.
Well, it's funny because you brought up Gen Z and I brought up my kids. I don't think my kids are as anomalous as it might seem just because they go to private school and whatever. Um, I keep seeing signs
They're
that
anomalous because they come from a stable two-parent family.
anomalous in that way, sure. But I do see the attitudes drifting. So there's that. I'm sure you've seen something about it, and I'm remembering. I'm misremembering. I'm not remembering the name of it. It's like Asbury movement or something like that. About movement towards Christianity. There's like this sort of um, organic revival toward a sort of thing that's been spreading across high schools and colleges, and I think mostly in the Midwest. Not out of Asbury Park, as I supposedly as I assumed.
Okay,
Which
well,
is
I'm not familiar with it.
oh,
Although
yeah.
I'm far more on the secular side than you are.
Yeah. Well, so apparently this is like a big deal amongst Gen Zs, and I see it with my kids. I see it with their friends, and again, you're right. I mean, I'm in a little bit of a cocoon in that way, but not entirely. Uh, I think Gen Z is kind of going to be a little bit of and some will say an overreaction, but I think a reaction to how secular everything has gotten. They're finding some solace and guidance in religion because the other modes and offerings of guidance are not doing them any good, and they don't like them.
Well, the problem with and being secular myself, which is a nice way of basically saying atheist, but being a secular person myself, I am not immune to the knowledge that secularism does in many ways offer very little metaphysical support.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that I would prefer religion because there is this built in metaphysical structure to it that offers you some sort of hope and promise of an afterlife when secularism says, the whole point of you being here is to do good while you're here. And then when you're gone forever. I believe that that's true, but it's not something in which I can find much comfort. I think
much motivation.
Yeah, and I think secularism misses out on the idea that there is a fundamental need in human beings for meaning and to be able to find meaning. And often
connection between generations. I think that's the other thing.
And to find meaning in something larger than themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think where most people, whether they're religious or not, tend to find it in legacy, in a connection to their families, and in furthering the family line and the family, traditions or whatever. There's something about family, I think, that religious or not, tends to create better behavior and more responsible behavior, and to raise more responsible kids, and to be more responsible humans. Now, and that's totally outside religion.
Well,
religion gives it a central focus and gives it some guidance.
I think that's largely true. I mean, there are always the edge cases where, dad beats up on mom and dad gets drunk.
There's edge cases where somebody takes religion and turns it into a suicide compact and kills a bunch of people.
Yeah, because the comet is coming. And so what obviously you have to kill yourself. And that's always the argument that comes back from the secular side, which is, the family isn't all roses and all fluffy kitties.
That's the beauty of it.
Are you
kidding me?
There are
Some
awful
of my
families.
Best memories are when the family went completely fucking nut show. I mean, and yet we're still family, and we still care about each other, and we still stay connected, even though we transgress some of the most horrible things that you could possibly do. We're still family. There's something really important about that. Religion extends that to, your religion, everybody's family, right? But if we just think about it just evolutionarily, family is fucking important. They're the only people you can really depend on. They're also the people most likely to kill you, but
yeah, that's the downside. But yes, as a matter of evolutionary, I hate to say evolution. Well, I can say evolutionary biology. It's evolutionary psychology that's the racist one. But as a matter of evolutionary biology, I mean, you're far safer in the ancestral environment with a very small, close-knit group of people who know each other well and who can interact with one another on a daily basis for self-protection. And you can't trust the people from those other tribes who may have completely different and foreign ways. And of course,
and who are going to be more loyal to their own family structures.
Yeah, of course, we don't live in the ancestral.
This is why we had all that intermarriage of tribes and whatever. That's how we combined and grew bigger. I mean, we're just recreating evolution here right now.
Well, it's really interesting to think about, in that the period of civilization, if we are going to accept the sort of the current modern archaeological thing, civilization and agriculture. And we've had to push this date back because of finds like Göbekli Tepe. But basically, we're talking 10,000 years. That's 10,000 years.
Probably more like 15, but yeah.
Yeah, but 10,000 years. If you want to push it back to the Neolithic, okay, fine. But I wouldn't consider that. I wouldn't consider that civilization. I think civilization.
No, I wouldn't consider it civilization, but it was.
Because
you'd still be get to the beginnings of civilization, of actual permanent settlements that had agriculture and all that stuff.
Yeah, you're probably down to about 10,000 years. Anything before that, you're looking at hunter-gatherers, more or less.
Well, I mean, was, yeah, about 10,000 years ago, 9,000.
9,000. Or, yeah, about 9,000,
Yeah,
7,500 BC or somewhere around there.
something like that, yeah.
Well, modern humans have been here for as much as 250,000 years. So, this last 10,000 years, while it seems like an extraordinarily long time to us in terms
Oh, the blip.
of history, is not a huge proportion of our biological time as modern humans on this planet, because it was like 240,000 years hunter-gatherers on the plains, 10,000 years cities and agriculture. I wonder how much of our societal problems are the fact that we don't really know how to live together without going crazy like rats in a coffee can, because biologically it is so foreign to our evolutionary experience.
I don't know. I mean, the reason that we have tribes, that we formed these eventual, what became at least city states, or, kingdoms, is because of our gregarious nature. But I think the real issues come when you start delineating who is what in terms of the hierarchy. And that's always, 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 always going to be problematic. There's always going to be a natural hierarchy. In ancient times, like super prehistory ancient times, it was easy. Whoever's the strongest.
Yes, but now
it was that easy.
We're social primates who are prone to dominance hierarchies. And
right.
By the way, the very fact that I speak French and you speak German might be a reason for us to engage in war fairly regularly, because I now have something that I can pin onto you as an other. You're clearly
and I might
other.
be able to convey my victory over you into something that benefits me.
Yeah, so I think we're, and I don't know any of this for sure, obviously, but I think we're still dealing with a lot of biological BS. And
yeah, no, of course we are. Absolutely we are. I don't think there's any way.
But I wonder how much of it has these societal impacts that we've been talking about.
So how much of it is innate versus mental?
Yeah, and by the way, I'm perfectly happy to go 50-50 nature over nurture. Hell, I'm happy to go 60-40 nature over nurture, maybe even higher. I'm sorry, nurture over nature.
Right.
I think obviously culture does play a role in our upbringing and
but I think that's what happened for about BC, like about 3,000 or so, is that culture started to become a more prominent factor in how people behaved, how they treated each other, how cultures were actually even formed and enforced. This is when you start to see the rise of the major religions, Judaism being one of the oldest, Hinduism being one of the other oldest. And it was a code. It was a code on how we work together and recognize one another as parts of the same code and treat each other with the same respect, so that we don't have to constantly be warring. And that's the one thing that I think is recognizable throughout all the development of all the religions is we need to stop fighting each other. It doesn't mean that they're not saying we shouldn't fight anybody. I mean, just like, hey, let's not let's choose our battles. Let's choose some people who we don't fight with and that we have common cause with. And that developed a lot of culture. And the development of actual culture, of a spreadable, distributive culture, changed into modernity eventually. I think that was the big change that happened about 3,000 BC or so. So about 5,000, 6,000 years ago. And that slowly became, delineated and divinated out and produced lots of other different cultures, but people I don't think they recognize it as culture. I mean, why would you? It's a word we put on it, but they did recognize that, okay, tribes, okay, can we expand the tribe? Well, maybe we can expand the tribe really wide if we can find these commonalities. And that was the focus of Judeo-Christian and even Islamic religions, was to find how we could all be connected to one another.
Okay, so let me interject here then. Let's assume that the history of civilization has been increasing our acceptance of what is us, from our immediate family to our clan, to our tribe, to our nation or city state, to ultimately the nation, however you want to define the nation.
Right.
So then I think the next argument would be, well, then why don't we want a world government? Why don't we want to see all humanity as us and not as the other? And that, I think, gets us into some interesting discussions.
Well, I'm hoping it's going to be on the next podcast because I'm done.
Yeah. I was just thinking myself that perhaps that discussion, since we're 2 hours into this, should be a discussion that we should hold in abeyance until next time. So I think with that in mind, it's time for us to say goodbye and plan on picking this up next week. Although we won't, we're going to talk about something completely different, as we always do. All right, Michael, have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, you too, Dale. Bye.
You're listening to the Observations podcast for Friday, the 10th of March, 2023. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We appreciate the fact that you do. And, well, heck, I guess I should say thanks for watching the podcast, since that's what we're doing now. Anyway, have a great week. We will look forward to talking to you again next week. Until then, so long.